The town of Wimberley, Texas, was the kind of place where dreams didn't just die, they withered slowly under the relentless sun. The cracked roads, flanked by dilapidated buildings, whispered tales of better days long gone. For Alfred Carter, a 25-year-old mechanic, this town was a cage. Every turn of a wrench in the suffocating heat felt like a reminder that his life was stuck in an endless loop of grease-stained hands and unfulfilled potential. Someday, Alfred muttered to himself, wiping the sweat from his brow. He leaned against a battered old truck he'd been working on for hours. Someday I'll get out of this place. Across town, his mother, Linda Carter, was finishing her second shift of the day. At 55, Linda had the worn look of someone who had spent a lifetime sacrificing for others. Her kind eyes belied the exhaustion in her step as she carried groceries into their modest home. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the roof leaked when it rained, but Linda made it a home nonetheless. It was all she could afford on her meager wages from cleaning houses and working part-time at the diner. When Alfred arrived home that evening, he found her at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of overdue bills. "Long day?" Linda asked with a tired smile. "Same as always," Alfred replied, dropping into a chair. His voice carried a trace of bitterness, though he tried to hide it. "Fixing old cars for people who can barely pay. It's not exactly the life I imagined." Linda reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "I know it's hard, Alfred. But we have each other, and that's more than a lot of people can say." He nodded but didn't meet her eyes. His dreams of wealth and freedom clashed too harshly with her quiet contentment. That night, as Alfred lay on his worn-out mattress, he scrolled aimlessly through his phone. A notification about the Mega Millions lottery caught his attention. The jackpot was an eye-popping $200 million. He stared at the number, imagining all the things he could do with that kind of money. No more busted trucks, no more sleepless nights worrying about bills, just freedom. The next day, after stopping for gas, Alfred noticed a lottery machine near the counter. On a whim, he bought a ticket. It felt like a small act of rebellion against his circumstances. Throwing money away, Alfred, he muttered under his breath as he walked out. But deep down, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. Days passed, and Alfred forgot about the ticket. Life in Wimberley continued as it always had, quiet, predictable, and stifling. On a Friday night, as he sat with Linda watching an old sitcom on their aging television, the lottery drawing came on. "And the winning numbers are..." The announcer's voice echoed through the living room. Alfred pulled the ticket from his wallet, not expecting much. As the numbers were read, his heart began to race. One by one, they matched. His breathing quickened, and his hands started to shake. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Mom." Linda turned, alarmed. "What's wrong?" "I won," Alfred stammered, holding up the ticket. I won the lottery." For a moment, Linda didn't respond. Then, a wide smile spread across her face. "Alfred, that's wonderful." She pulled him into a hug, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "This is our chance to finally catch a break." Alfred felt a surge of euphoria. In that moment, all his dreams seemed within reach. He imagined a life far removed from Wimberley, where luxury replaced struggle and he could finally be someone important. But as Linda began talking about paying off debts and fixing up their home, Alfred's mind drifted. In his vision of the future, Wimberley, and everything it represented, had no place. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire across Wimberley. Alfred Carter had won the $200 million jackpot. People he hadn't spoken to in years came out of the woodwork, flooding him with congratulatory messages. At first, Alfred reveled in the attention. It felt good to be the center of something big, to no longer be invisible. The lottery officials arrived later that week to guide Alfred through the process of claiming his winnings. Linda insisted on accompanying him to the meeting, sitting proudly at his side as the officials handed over the oversized check. The moment was surreal, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, and Alfred grinning ear to ear as he held the symbolic prize. "This is going to change everything," Linda said on the drive home. "We'll fix the house, pay off the bills, and maybe even take a trip somewhere nice. You've worked so hard, Alfred, you deserve this." Alfred nodded absent-mindedly, staring out the window. Though Linda's words were warm, they clashed with the image forming in his mind, a sleek, modern penthouse in a big city, where he could reinvent himself far from Wimberley. He wanted to leave behind the reminders of his struggles, even if that meant leaving parts of his life, and his mother, behind. A week later, Alfred purchased a brand new truck, packed his belongings, and announced that he was moving to Dallas. Linda was surprised but supportive. "Dallas?" she asked, trying to hide her disappointment. "That's so far." "It's where the opportunities are, Mom," Alfred explained. "I can't stay here forever. But don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I'll send you money every month, and we'll fix up the house. You deserve that much, at least." Linda forced a smile. "I understand. You're young, and you have big dreams. Just, don't forget where you came from, Alfred." Alfred hugged her tightly, promising to call every day. But deep down, he already felt the pull of a new life, a life where he could finally shed the weight of his small-town past. In Dallas, Alfred's world expanded rapidly. He rented a luxury apartment in the heart of the city and started making connections with people who seemed larger than life. They invited him to exclusive parties, introduced him to expensive hobbies, and showed him the kind of opulence he had only dreamed of. At first, he kept his promise to Linda, calling her every evening to check in. But as the weeks turned into months, the calls became less frequent. His new friends assured him this was normal. "Don't let the past hold you back," one of them said at a rooftop party, handing Alfred a glass of champagne. "You've earned this life. Live it." Alfred nodded, allowing himself to believe it. The more he indulged in his new reality, the more Wimberley, and Linda, felt like a distant memory. Back in Wimberley, Linda tried to stay optimistic. She busied herself with work and waited for Alfred's calls, though they came less often. When her car broke down on the way to her second job, she debated calling him for help but decided against it. "He's busy," she told herself. "He'll call when he can." Her neighbors began to notice her struggling. Some whispered about Alfred's success, questioning why he wasn't helping more. Linda defended him fiercely. "He's finding his way," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her. Months later, Linda received a bank transfer from Alfred, along with a short message, "Use this for the house. I'll call soon." The money was enough to cover the overdue bills and some repairs, but it wasn't the connection she longed for. She missed their conversations, the laughter they used to share, and the warmth of having him nearby. As Alfred's life in Dallas grew more extravagant, he barely noticed how far he had drifted from Linda. Surrounded by people who praised him for his wealth, he convinced himself that he was doing the right thing by focusing on his new life. Linda had what she needed, didn't she? One evening, after closing a deal on a flashy sports car, Alfred received a text from an old friend in Wimberley. It was a photo of Linda, standing outside their old house with a tired but hopeful expression. The caption read, "Your mom's been asking about you. She's proud of you, man." For a fleeting moment, Alfred felt a pang of guilt. But he pushed it aside, promising himself he'd visit soon. He didn't want to think about Wimberley now. There was another party to attend. The months turned into a year, and Alfred's new life in Dallas seemed perfect on the surface. His luxury apartment, perched high above the bustling city streets, was a symbol of everything he thought he had wanted. Sleek furniture, towering windows, and a garage full of cars he hardly used, he had it all. Yet, there were moments of stillness, late at night, when the city lights couldn't drown out the nagging emptiness in his chest. His days were filled with indulgence. Expensive dinners, impulsive shopping sprees, and lavish parties consumed his time. His new friends, people with last names he could never have imagined rubbing shoulders with, treated him like a king. But their flattery always seemed transactional, as if his worth was tied solely to the size of his bank account. At first, Alfred didn't mind. After all, wasn't this what success was supposed to feel like? He had escaped Wimberley. He wasn't fixing cars in the blistering sun anymore. And Linda, well, he'd send her money. She was fine, wasn't she? But deep down, Alfred knew better. One evening, Alfred attended a party at the penthouse of one of his wealthier acquaintances, a tech entrepreneur named Miles. The room buzzed with chatter about stock investments, vacation homes, and art collections. Alfred, holding a glass of imported wine, found himself drifting toward a balcony for some air. He stared out at the Dallas skyline, his mind wandering back to Wimberley. The old garage where he had spent years working, the small kitchen where Linda used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, it all felt like a lifetime ago. "You look lost," a voice said behind him. Alfred turned to see a woman about his age, dressed elegantly but with an air of authenticity that stood out in the crowd. "I'm fine," Alfred replied, forcing a smile. "Just enjoying the view." She introduced herself as Natalie, an artist who had grown disillusioned with the city's obsession with wealth. They talked for hours, and for the first time in months, Alfred felt a flicker of genuine connection. Natalie's stories about her modest upbringing reminded him of his own, and he found himself sharing bits and pieces of his life in Wimberley. "Why did you leave?" Natalie asked, her tone curious but kind. Alfred hesitated. "I needed to get away. Start fresh." Natalie studied him for a moment. "Sometimes, starting fresh means facing what you left behind." Her words stayed with Alfred long after the party ended. Back in Wimberley, Linda's life had grown harder. Her health, neglected for years, was beginning to decline. She worked fewer shifts at the diner, her strength waning with each passing day. The money Alfred had sent was helpful, but it wasn't enough to cover the mounting medical expenses. Her old car sat broken in the driveway, and without transportation, getting to work or even the grocery store became a struggle. Neighbors occasionally pitched in, driving her to appointments or dropping off food, but Linda's pride kept her from asking for too much. Still, she refused to burden Alfred with her troubles. He was living his dream, and she wouldn't ruin it for him. Alfred's life, however, was beginning to unravel. The extravagance that had once thrilled him now felt hollow. The friends who had crowded his apartment during the good times were nowhere to be found when his investments started to fail. He had poured millions into risky ventures, guided by promises of quick returns, only to watch his fortune slowly bleed away. One afternoon, Alfred received a call from his financial advisor. "You're running out of liquidity," the advisor warned. "If you don't adjust your spending and investments, you could be in serious trouble." Alfred hung up, the words echoing in his mind. He had never truly considered that the money might not last forever. That evening, while scrolling through his phone, Alfred came across a news article that made his heart stop. The headline read, "Local hero Linda Carter helps feed needy despite struggles of her own." The accompanying photo showed his mother standing outside a community center, handing out food to a line of people. Her face, though kind, looked older and more tired than he remembered. Alfred felt a wave of shame. While he had been throwing away his fortune on trivial pursuits, Linda had been struggling in silence, still giving what little she had to others. He stared at the photo for a long time, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. It was as if the world he had built for himself was suddenly stripped bare, revealing the truth he had been avoiding. He had abandoned the one person who had always stood by him. The following days were filled with turmoil. Alfred couldn't escape the image of Linda in that photo. He tried calling her, but the phone rang endlessly. When he finally reached her, she sounded cheerful, but there was a weariness in her voice he hadn't noticed before. "Alfred! It's so good to hear from you," Linda said. "Mom, He hesitated. "I saw the article. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Linda replied, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Things are a little tough, but we get by. I'm just so proud of you, Alfred. You're doing amazing things." The words cut deeper than any reprimand could have. "I'll come visit soon," Alfred promised. Linda's tone brightened. "I'd love that. But as Alfred hung up, he realized he didn't know if he had the courage to face her yet. The days after Alfred's call to Linda were restless. He couldn't shake the image of her tired face in the photo or the forced cheerfulness in her voice. The guilt gnawed at him, but so did his pride. How could he return to Wimberley after all this time? What would people say when they saw how far he had fallen? Alfred's finances were rapidly spiraling out of control. The flashy cars, the luxury apartment, the endless nights of indulgence, it had all drained his bank account. His financial advisor's warnings became more urgent, but Alfred found himself paralyzed, unable to stop the bleeding. One evening, while sifting through his dwindling funds, Alfred came across an unopened envelope from Linda. It had arrived months ago, buried under stacks of paperwork. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Alfred, I hope this letter finds you happy and well. I know you're busy with your new life, and I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. You've worked hard to get where you are, and you deserve every bit of your success. Things have been a little tough here, but don't you worry about me. I've always managed, and I always will. I just miss hearing your voice and seeing your face. The house feels so quiet without you around. I think about the Sundays we used to spend making pancakes or working on that old truck in the yard. Those were the best days of my life. No matter where you are or how far you go, I hope you know that you'll always have a home here. I love you, Alfred, more than words can say. Take care of yourself. Mom." Alfred read the letter over and over, his chest tightening with each word. The simple, heartfelt message was a painful reminder of how much he had taken Linda's love for granted. She wasn't angry. She wasn't blaming him. She just missed her son. He knew he couldn't put it off any longer. He had to go home. Back in Wimberley, Linda's situation had worsened. The bills continued to pile up, and her health was deteriorating. Without reliable transportation, she had stopped going to her doctor's appointments. Despite everything, she continued to volunteer at the community center, giving what little she could to help others. The people there admired her strength, though many whispered about Alfred's absence. "She's too proud to ask for help," one of the volunteers said. "But you'd think her millionaire son would step up." Linda overheard but didn't respond. She simply smiled and continued her work, carrying trays of food to the hungry. Meanwhile, Alfred finally made the decision to sell some of his remaining assets. The sports cars, the designer clothes, and even the penthouse, everything he had once cherished felt meaningless now. He used the money to buy a modest truck and prepared to leave Dallas. The thought of returning to Wimberley filled him with dread, but also with a glimmer of hope. The drive to his hometown was long and quiet. As the Dallas skyline faded in his rearview mirror, Alfred felt a strange sense of relief. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew he couldn't keep running from the past. When he arrived in Wimberley, the sight of the familiar streets brought a flood of memories. The old garage where he had worked, the diner where Linda had spent countless hours serving coffee, the little house he had grown up in, all of it was exactly as he remembered, but somehow smaller and more worn. He parked outside the community center, where he had seen the photo of Linda. Stepping inside, he scanned the room until his eyes landed on her. She was sitting at a table, her back hunched and her hands trembling slightly as she sorted supplies. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. Linda looked up, startled. For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if trying to decide whether he was real. Then her face softened into a smile. "Alfred," she said, her voice filled with equal parts joy and exhaustion. He rushed to her side, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his. "I'm so sorry," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I've been a terrible son. I abandoned you when you needed me most, and I don't deserve your forgiveness." Linda reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Oh, Alfred," she said softly. "You're here now. That's all that matters." For hours, they talked, about the struggles Linda had faced, about Alfred's regrets, and about the things that truly mattered. Alfred promised to make things right, starting with taking Linda home. When they arrived at the house, Alfred was struck by how much it had deteriorated. The paint was peeling, the yard was overgrown, and the roof sagged ominously. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing he could have prevented this. "We'll fix it," he said, determination in his voice. "We'll fix everything." Linda smiled, though her strength was fading. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Alfred rose early the next morning, ready to face the daunting task of rebuilding both the house and his relationship with Linda. The morning sun bathed their old home in a warm light, but it did little to mask the wear and tear that years of neglect had wrought. The paint on the walls was faded and cracked, weeds had overtaken the yard, and the roof looked as though it might give way at any moment. "We'll start with the roof," Alfred said, more to himself than anyone else. Linda, seated in her usual spot by the window, sipped tea from a chipped mug and smiled softly. "Alfred, you don't have to fix everything in one day," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm just glad you're here." Alfred turned to her, guilt etched deeply into his face. "I need to do this, Mom. I need to make up for everything I've done, or didn't do." Linda said nothing, but the warmth in her eyes spoke volumes. She didn't need him to fix the house, she needed him to stay. As Alfred worked on repairs, the townspeople began to take notice. Some watched from a distance, whispering among themselves about the prodigal son's return. Others, moved by Linda's quiet strength and Alfred's determination, stepped in to lend a hand. One of the first to show up was Mr. Thompson, the retired carpenter who lived a few blocks away. "Figured you could use some help," he said, handing Alfred a toolbox. "Your mom's done a lot for this community. It's about time we give back." Soon, others joined. Neighbors brought supplies, donated paint, and even prepared meals for the volunteers. Alfred, initially hesitant, found himself overwhelmed by the support. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, not because of his money, but because of the connections he was rebuilding. While the repairs progressed, Alfred and Linda grew closer. Each evening, they sat together at the kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter that had been absent for far too long. One night, as they ate a simple dinner of soup and bread, Alfred asked, "Why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten?" Linda hesitated, her hands resting on the table. "I didn't want to be a burden," she admitted. "You were living your dream, Alfred. I didn't want to take that away from you." Alfred shook his head, his voice filled with regret. "You were never a burden, Mom. I was so caught up in trying to escape my past that I forgot the person who made it possible for me to dream in the first place." Linda reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "We can't change the past, Alfred. But we can choose what we do from here." Despite the progress, Linda's health continued to decline. She grew weaker with each passing day, her energy sapped by years of overwork and neglect. Alfred noticed the way her hands trembled as she carried her tea, the way she struggled to catch her breath after climbing the stairs. One afternoon, while they were sitting on the porch, Alfred said, "You need to see a doctor, Mom." Linda waved him off. "Doctors cost money we don't have." Alfred frowned. "I sold the penthouse. The cars. Everything. I have enough to make sure you get the care you need." Linda looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "You sold all that, for me?" "Of course," Alfred said, his voice breaking. "I should have done it a long time ago." Alfred took Linda to a nearby clinic, where she was diagnosed with advanced heart disease. The doctor explained that years of stress and untreated health issues had taken their toll. Linda would need ongoing care and possibly surgery. "It's serious," the doctor said gently. "But with the right treatment, we can improve her quality of life." Alfred nodded, determined. "We'll do whatever it takes." As they left the clinic, Linda placed a hand on Alfred's arm. "Thank you," she said softly. "For being here." Alfred smiled through his own tears. "I'll always be here, Mom. I promise." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Alfred juggled Linda's appointments with the ongoing repairs to the house, pouring every ounce of energy into making things right. The community continued to rally around them, inspired by Alfred's transformation and Linda's resilience. One afternoon, as Alfred was painting the front porch, Natalie, the woman he had met at the Dallas party, pulled up in a small car. She stepped out, looking slightly out of place in Wimberley's quiet streets but no less genuine. "I heard about what you've been doing," she said, smiling. "I wanted to see for myself." Alfred grinned, setting down his paintbrush. "Welcome to Wimberley." Natalie spent the afternoon helping with the repairs, her easygoing nature bringing a sense of lightness to the hard work. As the sun set, she and Alfred sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. "You seem different," Natalie said, glancing at him. "Happier." "I am," Alfred admitted. "It's not the life I thought I wanted, but it's the one I needed." Natalie nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Sometimes, finding your way back is the hardest part. But it's worth it." By the time the house was fully repaired, Alfred felt like a new person. The peeling paint was replaced with a fresh coat, the roof no longer leaked, and the yard was neatly trimmed. But more importantly, the bond between Alfred and Linda had been restored. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, Linda leaned her head against Alfred's shoulder. "You've given me more than I could have ever asked for," she said softly. Alfred wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. "You gave me everything, Mom. This is the least I can do." For the first time in years, the house felt like a home again. The house stood as a testament to resilience. With its freshly painted walls, repaired roof, and tidy yard, it no longer reflected years of hardship but rather a renewed sense of hope. Yet for Alfred, it was just the beginning. He knew that redemption wasn't about fixing the past, it was about what he did moving forward. Linda's health remained fragile. Alfred attended every appointment with her, sitting attentively as doctors explained her condition. He made sure she followed her treatment plan, prepared her meals, and kept her spirits high with stories about the townspeople pitching in to help. Despite her physical weakness, Linda's warmth and humor filled the house. "Remember when you used to sneak cookies before dinner?" Linda teased one evening as Alfred brought her a tray of soup and tea. "I was 7, Alfred said, laughing. "And you always caught me." "Of course I did," Linda replied with a wink. Moms know everything. The community continued to rally around them, and Alfred found himself more connected to Wimberley than he'd ever been. He began volunteering at the same community center where Linda had spent so much time. At first, it was to honor her contributions, but over time, Alfred discovered a sense of purpose in helping others. He worked with the center's director to expand its food pantry, using what remained of his lottery winnings to stock shelves with fresh produce and essentials. He also arranged for repairs to the center's aging facilities, ensuring it could continue to serve the community for years to come. During one of his shifts, Alfred noticed a young boy struggling to carry a bag of food. The boy's clothes were worn, and his face was streaked with dirt, but his determination was undeniable. "Hey, need a hand?" Alfred asked, crouching down. The boy hesitated before nodding. "It's for my mom. She's sick." Alfred's chest tightened. He helped the boy load the food into a wagon and walked with him partway home, listening to the boy's stories about his family. The experience reminded Alfred of his own struggles growing up and reinforced his resolve to make a difference. Linda watched Alfred's transformation with quiet pride. Though her energy was limited, she found ways to support his efforts. She knitted blankets for the community center, wrote thank you notes to volunteers, and spent hours listening to Alfred's plans for future projects. One afternoon, as Alfred shared his vision for expanding the center's programs, Linda interrupted him gently. "You're doing so much good," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Alfred paused, realizing he hadn't thought much about his own well-being. "I'm fine, Mom," he replied. "This is what I need to do." Linda smiled knowingly. "Just promise me you'll find time to be happy. Life isn't just about giving, it's about living, too." Her words stayed with Alfred, especially as he began to notice Natalie's increasing presence in his life. She had returned to Wimberley several times since their first meeting, helping with the community center and spending evenings with Alfred and Linda. There was an ease between them, a connection that Alfred hadn't felt with anyone in years. One evening, Alfred and Natalie sat on the porch, the quiet hum of crickets filling the air. "You've changed so much since we met," Natalie said, her tone warm. Alfred nodded. "I think I've finally figured out what matters." Natalie tilted her head, studying him. "And what's that?" "Family," Alfred replied without hesitation. "And doing something that means more than just chasing money." Natalie smiled. "Sounds like you're on the right path." For the first time in years, Alfred felt like he was where he belonged. As the weeks turned into months, Linda's health showed signs of improvement. The treatments were helping, and her spirits were higher than they'd been in years. Alfred reveled in the small victories, seeing her laugh, watching her enjoy meals, and hearing her talk about the future. But despite the progress, Alfred knew that time was precious. He made every moment count, creating memories that would last a lifetime. One Sunday, he and Linda revisited some of their old traditions. They made pancakes together in the kitchen, just as they had when Alfred was a boy. Linda insisted on flipping the pancakes herself, laughing as she nearly dropped one. "Still got it," she said with a grin. "You always do," Alfred replied, his heart full. Word of Alfred's transformation spread beyond Wimberley. Local newspapers picked up the story of the lottery winner who had returned home to rebuild his life and give back to his community. The articles painted him as a symbol of redemption, someone who had learned the true value of wealth. When Alfred read the stories, he felt a mix of pride and humility. He didn't see himself as a hero, he was just a man trying to make amends. But he couldn't deny the impact his journey was having, not just on himself but on everyone around him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Linda sat beside Alfred on the porch, her hand resting lightly on his. "I'm proud of you, Alfred," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Alfred turned to her, his eyes glistening. "I wouldn't be here without you, Mom. Everything I've done, it's because of what you taught me." Linda smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You've done more than I could have ever hoped for." For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Alfred felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had finally found his way home, not just to Wimberley, but to the person he was always meant to be. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Alfred's life. The house he had repaired with Linda stood as a beacon of their restored bond, and the community center flourished under Alfred's guidance. Linda, though still frail, found joy in the small moments, laughing with Alfred, sipping tea on the porch, and seeing the people of Wimberley benefit from the work her son had undertaken. But even as the days were filled with light, Alfred couldn't ignore the growing shadows. Linda's health had reached a delicate balance, and the doctors had warned that despite her strength, time was not on her side. One crisp autumn morning, Linda called Alfred into the living room. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, a soft quilt draped over her lap. Her smile was warm but tinged with a hint of sadness. "Alfred, there's something I need to talk to you about," she began. Alfred knelt beside her, his heart sinking. "What is it, Mom?" "I'm so proud of everything you've done," she said, her voice steady but soft. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed. But I need you to promise me one thing." "Anything," Alfred replied, his throat tightening. "When the time comes," Linda said gently, "I don't want you to stop living. You've found something beautiful here, Alfred. Hold on to it. Keep helping people, keep loving, and keep moving forward." Tears welled in Alfred's eyes, but he nodded. "I promise, Mom." Linda smiled and rested her hand on his. That's all I needed to hear. The first frost of winter came early that year. Linda's health began to decline rapidly, and Alfred spent every moment by her side. He read to her, shared stories from his day, and played her favorite music. Despite her fading strength, Linda's spirit never wavered. She continued to reassure Alfred, even as she grew weaker. One quiet evening, as the snow fell gently outside, Linda passed peacefully in her sleep. Alfred held her hand until the first light of dawn, his heart heavy with loss but filled with gratitude for the time they had shared. The days following Linda's passing were a blur. The town came together to honor her memory, filling the small church where her service was held. People shared stories of her kindness, her resilience, and her unwavering love for Alfred. Standing at the front of the church, Alfred addressed the crowd. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. "My mom taught me what it means to love unconditionally," he began. "She gave everything she had, not just to me, but to this community. She showed me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the lives we touch." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor her legacy, not because I have to, but because it's what she would have wanted." After the service, Alfred returned to the house. It felt quieter, emptier, but still full of Linda's presence. Her favorite blanket lay folded on the armchair, her knitting needles resting on the side table. Alfred sat in her chair, clutching a letter he had found on her bedside table, addressed to him. "Dear Alfred, if you're reading this, it means my journey has ended. But don't be sad, my boy. I've lived a good life, and the last months I spent with you were the happiest I could have ever asked for. You've grown into a man I'm so proud of, someone kind, selfless, and strong. I know you'll continue to make a difference, not just in Wimberley but wherever life takes you. Remember, the world is better because you're in it. I'll always be with you, Alfred. Every sunrise, every laugh, every moment of joy, you'll find me there. Love, Mom." Alfred wiped his tears and carefully tucked the letter away. It was a reminder of the love that had shaped him and the promise he had made to her. In the weeks that followed, Alfred poured his energy into the community center, dedicating a new wing in Linda's honor. The Linda Carter Outreach Program provided food, medical care, and support for families in need. Her legacy became a cornerstone of the town, a testament to the kindness and compassion she had embodied. Natalie remained by Alfred's side, her steady presence a source of comfort and strength. Together, they dreamed of expanding the program to neighboring towns, ensuring that Linda's spirit would continue to touch lives far beyond Wimberley. One evening, Alfred stood outside the community center, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of gold and pink, a reflection of the warmth he felt in his heart. He thought of Linda, her laughter, her unwavering love, and her quiet wisdom. She had taught him the most valuable lesson of all, that life's greatest riches come not from what we take, but from what we give. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Alfred smiled, feeling her presence in the cool evening breeze. He knew she was watching, proud of the man he had become. And in that moment, Alfred made a vow to himself and to her memory: he would carry her light forward, always.